Hi everyone, welcome. So this care label that you see here, marked as 100% wool, well there's no wool remaining because the worms ate it all, but last check-in 15 days ago with these European nightcrawler worms was when we finally called off the wool fabric composting experiment, and the only thing remaining was the synthetic materials. All the rest of the sweater got consumed. And you know, I mean, technically speaking, I wouldn't be surprised if there's still itsy bitsy scraps or shreds of that thing around here. But we did need to come up with some sort of a rational way of calling it when we felt like it had run its course, the test basically. So I think it was fair to say that once we could no longer clearly pull a piece of material out of the bed and say, yeah, this right here is wool, then we would consider the test as done. But then again, it's just kind of like a bedding material, I would say, at this point, as it falls apart and everything. But I would have to say that if there is any wool remaining in here, it's certainly not going to last much longer. So we're back to running these guys as a normal worm bin or pair of worm bins, because in order to maintain kind of a quarantine for the wool fabric, we kept them in plastic boxes, and within those plastic boxes that were containing the wool, we were feeding. The boxes had holes so the worms could come and go, but now we're back to just being able to utilize the entire system. And last time was the first time we fed normally and not inside the plastic boxes. So the systems are 88 days of age. I think I mentioned already how it's been 15 days since we were last in here to conclude our wool fabric composting experiment, and we've given these guys 6 feedings so far. And feeding number 7, I've been wanting to be pretty generous, so I came down here with what to me feels like a pretty heavy load of food, mostly soup greens. From what I could tell, it looks like your typical orange carrots as well as those white parsnip carrots. A couple days worth of coffee, and there might be other things in here. I had this really large plastic bag in my freezer in which that stuff was. It was just a combination of stuff, so I just kind of leaned on it to break some stuff loose and poured it out into the plastic transport container, and I guess we'll get a closer look at what we ended up with once we get to giving it to the worms. I always like how the systems look when you come in and you find all this nice leafy matter that had been spread out here as a top covering. It's all catching the moisture that's recirculating beneath the plastic coverings, getting nice and damp. And I'm also noticing flying insects. I noticed them when I bought the system over originally, so before I completely lose track, I usually use mosquito dunks to try to control flying insect populations in my systems. So you've probably seen this stuff around in your hardware store, intended to help you control outbreaks of mosquitoes in your standing water on your property. Well, in the past I would always make a solution out of this stuff and apply this stuff with a spray bottle, but more lately I've just been grinding this stuff up in my Magic Bullet blender and using this spice shaker to dispense the stuff in sort of a powder form. But I was out, but there was a little bit of material still, a little bit of mosquito dunks still adhering to this container. And I figured, well, since I haven't had a chance yet to grind down another one of those donuts, I'll see if I could rinse out what was remaining in this bottle, just so we can put some in here. So it's not going to harm the existing flies that are in here already, these gnats or fruit flies or whatever these are. But if they are laying eggs and trying to create a new colony of baby flying insects, that's where this stuff will prevent that from happening. It just interferes with the development of the juvenile flying insects. So I think the last feeding also consisted of similar stuff. I think there was carrot peels then too, but there might have also been potato peels. We'll know right away because the potato peels always leave behind their skin as the worms nibble off all the nice, delicious, starchy goodness off the peel. they'll leave that behind, and you don't have to worry, that stuff will eventually go too, but they always go for what's soft and easy to eat first, and then eventually the tougher stuff also gets to the point where they can take advantage of it. So it is interesting how certain foods seem to have like a couple different characteristics of being able to satisfy the appetite of the worms pretty readily with part of what it's made up of, and then other parts of it are sort of like time release food supply, which, you know, sort of limits its own breakdown rate somehow, perhaps just by a resistance to decomposition. So I really, other than maybe a couple potato peels, I don't think I saw any signs of leftovers from the last feeding. Well, I mean, unless you count the shredded paper cardboard that was used as the bedding, the foundation for that last feeding. Those I don't really count as leftovers. I'm really kind of looking for the actual food that was given and how much of it might have been kind of rejected or ignored. Like this is a good example here. See all this potato peel? The worms have actually done a really nice job getting in between some of the pieces that were laying up against one another. But when stuff is in a big pile, whatever's on the outside is fair game for the process. But I mean, anything that's within that little bundle of material, it's not getting any attention. Perhaps a little bit of fungal activity, microbes getting down in there and getting started, but worms aren't going to be able to get at that. So keeping stuff spread out and easy to access is always a good way to go. I've got more of my shredded paper cardboard, but I really would like to take advantage of this feeding to try to do away with some of the these nice fancy napkins that I bring home from my mom's place all the time. And it does feel like bundling some of their food up in these napkins definitely motivates them to also work down the paper itself too. So I've got 4 of these nice big huge luxurious napkins. So let's see if we can make some nice big burritos for them to nibble on out of them. Alrighty. Thought about grabbing a couple more of these, but that's okay. They are starting to pile up again. Sometimes I find myself kind of in inventory overload with certain things. I don't know why. Sometimes it's just because out of sight, out of mind. It's like at some point in the future I'll be reminded of something I've been just walking right past, something that might be right here on the bench next to me that I intended to give to the worms at some point, but somehow my eye got used to seeing it there and it just became part of the furniture. And I'm sort of, you know, not on the whole thing of, well, when am I going to finally give it to the worms? It's more like, well, that just looks like part of the furniture. They must belong there. So it is funny when certain things eventually surface after a long dormant period like that. It does feel to me like the 2 burritos that I created for bin number 2 were much larger than the burritos we made for bin number 1. So it almost feels like the remainder of this stuff here should go to bin number 1. Well, whatever. We'll give these little guys a little bit of stuff on the outside of the paper that they can start working on before they can get to what's inside the paper, because yeah, like you saw, food is sort of obscured from them by the paper, but I don't think that's going to slow them down too much. I'm fairly sure they're going to be able to work their way through that pretty quickly. I'm sprinkling a little bit of my pulverized eggshell in here too to serve as grit for these little guys, and you know, I've got this sweetened coconut flakes. Not a whole lot left in this bag, so I believe it's time for this to go too. This is another one of those things that's been out here on my bench. I remember feeding it to a couple worm bins quite some time ago. For whatever reason, this last little bit has just been sitting here, totally blending in and not getting the attention it deserves by getting into the worm bins. So I always like, not always, but if possible, I like marking where we last fed with my coffee filters, because the coffee filters would pile up if we didn't put them to some good use. And by using them as feeding zone indicators, it sort of feels like we're putting them to good use. So that's our feeding. Let's pull in material from the outsides to help cover up. That will also bring with it some of this leafy matter that we pushed aside that had been resting out here on the surface. This stuff to me always seems like it's providing the greatest value in the system when I blend it into a whole bunch of really dark, you know, pretty heavily broken down material. Not to say that the stuff out here on the edges is so far broken down yet. I mean, after 88 days, the systems have a long way to go yet. But as far as just the overall darkness and, you know, appearance of this stuff, it does look like it could benefit from a little bit of fresh bedding type material blended down into it. So that looks really nice. I'm just attempting to get things semi-level here. And don't forget, we're going to come in with my box of leaves too. Give this system a nice, both systems a nice addition of more leaves out on the surface. And, you know, I even had my prepared bedding here. I thought that that would go into the feeding zones as well to complement the napkins that we used as bedding. I'll admit that that is a pretty skimpy amount of bedding there. as far as those couple napkins going to each system. So while I conclude here with the tilling up of the outer edges of the systems and blending in of the leaves, I have a moment to brainstorm possible ways to give them just a little bit more bedding. And it's just making me think of something I don't think I've tried much, if at all, in the past. Lately I've been all about putting leaves out on the top surface of my systems as a top coating. I was wondering how it might look if we were to also include a little bit of my prepared bedding along with the leaves. It'll still look nice, I think, but it'll provide a little variety. So to me, somehow this prepared bedding of mine always feels like stuff that ends up getting buried very rarely or never gets left out here on the surface like this. So that was kind of my idea for making up for not putting bedding down into the feeding zones in addition to the napkins. So I think we're doing pretty good in here. 88-day-old systems coming along pretty nice. European nightcrawler is always a good dependable worm. And now that there's no more wool experiment going on here, because I mean showing you the tag and just recapping what happened last time seemed realistic, but it seems unlikely that the topic of wool will come up in these systems much anymore. We need to start thinking of new ideas for these wormies. At 88 days, they've still got plenty of time in service where we can maybe get into a slightly longer experiment. So I'll be thinking of ideas for what to do in here next. If you've got any ideas, please feel free to share. I'd love to hear it. I'm always getting great ideas from the viewers, so I'm not bashful about asking for more. I always really get these really good ideas, stuff that I've even perhaps thought about myself but never had the motivation to pursue, at least up until I do get some concurrence from viewers that they're also interested in certain topics, and then I pursue them. But let me know if you got any good ideas for these ENCs. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.